Welcome to another episode of Math with Mrs. Wilson. This is section 9.2, Solving Quadratics by Completing the Square. And by the end of this section, you'll be able to complete the square of a binomial expression, solve quadratic equations of the form x squared plus bx plus c equals 0 by completing the square, and solve quadratic equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 by completing the square. Completing the square is how the quadratic equation was derived. And so this is a really important concept in math and something that we will revisit in future courses of math. Well, let's start with completing the square of x squared plus bx. First, we identify the coefficient of x. So in this first example A, the coefficient of x is negative 16. Then we find 1/2 of b, so that number negative 16 is b, and we square it. And then so let's do that right now. We're going to take 1/2 of that, so negative 16 divided by 2, and we are going to square it. So negative 16 over 2 is negative 8, and negative 8 squared is 64. So in step 3, so that just equals 64. In step 3, we add that number to the x squared plus bx, and then we factor it because it's a perfect square trinomial. So this 1/2 b squared is 64. Okay? Let's add that to both sides. So we have x squared minus 16x plus 64. And then we're just going to write that. So we're just completing the square, so we don't actually have to solve it right now. Otherwise, I would have had to add 64 to both sides of this as if it were an equation. So this is just equal to x minus 8 squared. And that's how you complete the square when it's in this form. So let's do this again for b, but b is a fraction. So we're going to do the same steps. We're going to have 3/4, but we want half of it, and we're going to square it. All right, so this is what we're doing to complete the square. Half of 3/4 is equal to 3/8. Then we're going to square it. So that is going to be equal to 9 over 64. We're going to add 9 over 64 to this expression, c squared plus 3/4 c plus 9 over 64. Now we are going to add, or we're going to make this into a perfect square trinomial, so we're factoring it, which means that we're going to have 3/8. Notice where that number came from. So c plus 3/8 squared is how that factors. I'm going to pause the video and allow you to work in your groups on C and D. So those are our try it, C and D, and then you'll come back and check your answers. Go ahead and check your answers. Now we're going to take what we just learned and we're going to apply it to solving by completing the square. And so we're just going to look at this piece right here. It's the same as what we had above. So we're going to take the 4 and we're going to do 4 is our b, so we're going to divide it by 2 and square it. So that would be 4 over 2 squared. 4 over 2 is 2. 2 squared is equal to 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides of the equation. We're going to add 4. We're going to add 4. So that is going to be x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 5 plus 4, which is just 9. All right, so that's how we complete the square. We just add that to both sides. Now we are going to factor it because it's a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to have x plus 2 and x plus 2, just x plus 2 squared is equal to 9. Now we need to go back to what we learned in our last section in 9.1, and we're going to solve this using the square root rule. So we'll square root both sides. And when we do that, we get x plus 2, and then it's equal to plus or minus the square root of 9. All right, and then we're going to subtract 2 from both sides, so x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus. Well, the square root of 9 is just 3, so let's simplify that. So our answers are going to be x is equal to negative 2 plus 3. Negative 2 plus 3 is not negative. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. And x is equal to negative 2 minus 3, so x is equal to negative 5. I'll pause the video here and allow you to work on the try it. Solve it by completing the square. Y squared minus 10y equals negative 9. When you are finished checking your answer, go ahead and turn your page. Included in your notes are steps to solving a quadratic equation in the form x squared plus bx plus c equals 0 by completing the square. So we're going to follow these steps as we go through our examples, and when we solve an equation by completing the square, the answers will not always be integers. All right, so sometimes the answer might be a fraction. Let's look at this one. The first step says to isolate the variable terms on one side and the constants on the others. That's already done. Then we have to find 1/2 b squared. So half of negative 10 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is 25. So we're just going to add that to both sides. That's step 2. And then we factor that. So if we factor this whole thing, that's going to be y minus 5 squared. On the other side, we have negative 10. And then we square both sides, so we get y minus 5 is equal to, well, if we take the square root of negative 10, we get an imaginary number. So I'm just going to write it like that. Then we add 5 to both sides, so y is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 10i. Then we're just going to rewrite that as 2 answers. So y equals 5 plus the square root of 10i, and we can't simplify the square root of 10, so we'll just leave it. And y equals 5 minus the square root of 10i. All right. So I'm going to pause the video and allow you to work on the try it in your groups, and then you'll come back and check it. Go ahead and check your answers, and we will do the next problem together. All right, so similar concept. We have negative 16, so half of negative 16 is negative 8, and negative 8 squared is 64, so we're going to add 64 to both sides. And negative 16 plus 64 is the same as 64 minus 16, which is 48. And then we just factor this as x minus 8 squared is equal to 48. Take the square root of both sides, and we get x minus 8 equals the square root of 48. That can simplify because 16 goes into 48 3 times. So 16 times 3 3 is going to stay in. 16 comes out as 4. Don't forget our plus or minus. So x equals, I'm going to add 8 to both sides right now. And so that gives us x is equal to 8 plus 4 square roots of 3, and x is equal to 8 minus 4 square roots of 3. Let's do the next one before I let you do the two triads. Alright, so on this next one, we have to get the variables on one side and the constants on the other. So instead we're going to have a squared plus 4a. I subtract 9 from both sides and get 21. Now we're going to use our completing the square method. So half of 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4, so we add 4 to both sides. 21 plus 4 is 25. So this is going to be a plus 2 squared is equal to 25. Taking the square root of both sides, we have a plus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 25 is 5. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So a is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 5. If I simplify that, negative 2 plus 5 is 3, and negative 2 minus 5 is negative 7. Alright, go ahead and do these next two triad problems with your groups, and then we'll come back and check our answers. Go ahead and check your answers, and then we'll do the next one. Alright, on this one we have a coefficient in front of the m squared and the m. So what I'm going to do is just divide by 2. So we're going to get m squared plus 8m plus 7 equals 0. In this case, we can just factor it because we don't even need to use what we've been working on just now, because factors of 7 that add up to 8 are this. And so we get m equals negative 7 and m equals negative 1. We could use the method of completing the square, but I just recognize that that factors nicely. On this next one, you're going to need to divide by 4. So n squared minus 6n minus, let's see, 40, 10, 14, 2. Now this one we will use completing the square. So let's do n squared minus 6n. We will add 14 to the other side, so we get 16. Now, completing the square, so we'll look at negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. So n squared minus 6n plus 9 is equal to 25 if we add 9 to that side. Our perfect square trinomial is n minus 3 squared equals 25. Taking the square root of each side gives us n minus 3 is equal to plus or minus 5. Add 3 to both sides, and you get n is equal to 3 plus 5, which is equal to 8, and n is equal to 3 minus 5, which is equal to negative 2. So those are our two solutions. When you're ready, turn the page. On this next one, we have a coefficient of 3, so let's just divide everything by 3. That gives us r squared minus 2/3 r is equal to 7. What is half of 2/3? 2/6. And then we're going to square 2/6 and get 4/36. So we're going to add 4/36 to both sides. And then this would factor as r squared minus 2/6, which is just 1/3 squared. And we can actually simplify 4/36 into 1/9, so 7 and 1/9. And then we're going to take the square root of both sides. I messed up right here. There shouldn't be a square right here. When we take the square root of both sides, we get r minus 1/3 is equal to plus or minus the square root. I'm going to write this as an improper, so 64/9, which is actually really nice because that is a perfect square. So we have r over 1/3 is equal to plus or minus 8/3. So we add 1/3 to both sides. R is equal to 1/3 plus 8/3, which is equal to 9/3, which is just 3. And then r is equal to 1/3 minus 8/3, which is equal to negative 7/3. Those are our two solutions. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and let you follow those same steps to do the next problem. And check your answer. The next steps that I have here are similar to what we've just been doing. If we have a coefficient of x squared, we have to divide by that coefficient. So that's kind of what we've been doing. And then it's the same steps that we've been using. All right, so for this very last example, we divide by 3. We get y squared minus 10/3 y is equal to negative 5/3. Half of this would be negative 10/6, which would be negative 5/3. And negative 5/3 squared is 25/9. So we're going to add 25/9 to both sides. And then we're going to change that into a perfect square trinomial, or we're going to factor it because it's a perfect square trinomial. And that would be minus 5/6, or no, minus 5/3. Right. Squared. I'm going to change this into ninths by multiplying by 3. So that'd be negative 15 plus 25 is 10/9. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Y minus 5/3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 10, and the square root of 9 is 3. We add 5/3 to both sides, so 5/3 plus the square root of 10/3 is one answer, and y equals 5/3 minus the square root of 10/3 is the other solution. And those are our two solutions. All right, that was a lot for completing the square, so I want you to go back and think of some of the important steps that we need to use to complete the square. Like, how do we find what we're going to add to both sides? What do we do if there's a coefficient? Remembering to use the square root property. So write a 2-sentence summary on what we learned.